Today, I'd just like to say hello to Chris. Chris, you with us?
Yes, sir, I am.
Great. I'm very excited to have Chris Nickerson here on the phone and sharing him with our webinar audience. Chris is a worldwide speaker, and I'm just, instead of reading a bio of Chris, I'm just going to ask him some quick questions. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about what it was like being on doing a TED Talk, and give us a little a feel for that.
Sure. It was pretty nerve-wracking, I guess. I've probably given somewhere in the realm of 800 to 1,000 talks in my career, and I've never had someone come up to me and say, "Give a talk in 18 minutes," and also be able to match the quality of the presenters that also come before me and after me, as well as other people in the TED series of talks. So it was definitely a different format, being able to try and condense some type of pertinent information that was at least actionable or elicited emotion in that amount of time. But it was great. It was a great experience. It was fun to work within the constraints of that format, but still be able to try and get a message out of really what drives the community that I came from, which is considered the hacker community and that culture, and really trying to give people a different understanding of the word hacker, the way that we grew up with it, that I grew up with it, that it was something that was not a pejorative. It was not something that's interchangeable with criminal. It was something where people actually use that term for those of us who looked at something and said, I'm not concerned about what it does, I'm concerned about what it can do. And that's really what some of that talk was about. And honestly, what a lot of my career has been about is looking at the whole of systems, the whole of organizations, not necessarily being concerned what they do right now, but what's possible for them to do.
That's really cool, and it's great to have a hacker on the phone. So if any of you attending want to view Chris's TED Talk, it is online by going to YouTube. So Chris, tell me a little bit about all those credentials by your name: CISSP, CISA, IEM, IAM.
Sure.
Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, those of us in security, because it is a market where very few people have an extreme level of knowledge. What we do is we often go out and look towards certification paths in order to give people kind of a standard understanding of, this is a quality practitioner, or this is somebody who has achieved a certain level of information. A lot of that really started because the schools did not catch up, and still are working on catching up today, but until about the mid-2000s, most universities still did not have very solid InfoSec programs. So the certificate path was one of those things where the CISSP by IC squared, they are the largest body of certifying professionals for information security. So the general domains of security, giving people a understanding that you're competent within the operations of those domains. The CISA is from another organization that you want to go through the alphabet soup. Their main focus in security is IT and audit. So making sure that security is an auditable function and that it's tracked regularly. The IEM and IAM were both certifications that were presented by the NSA, being able to try and give people a level of information understanding that it was a little bit deeper. Is what the agency was using at the time in order to give people foundational understandings of information security, as well as kind of how to assess it and how to practice it in future.
That's pretty neat. So you were a hacker kind of turned establishment. Can you talk a little bit about this business that you started and some of your code? I think you have a Dread Pirate Roberts with you as well, or tell us about that.
Yeah, so the way I came into this industry was kind of like all of us who are capricious youth. We took a look at systems, try and get an understanding of what is this little box that, or I guess at the time, big box with green writing on the desk inside of one of my parents' offices. And I had never seen it before, wanted to play with it, played with it often, was told not to play with it. So then I had to learn physical security because they started locking the door and I still wanted to go play with this neat box. At the time, it didn't necessarily connect to anything. We didn't have a modem, so I couldn't really dial into anything, but I got an understanding of how it worked and being able to play with it. And then as I learned that we could dial into things and dialing into bulletin boards and sharing information, trying to get an understanding of sort of how I could get access to all of this new and interesting stuff. Would progress then onto the internet and then being able to work with other different organizations and groups of people that were kind of springing from the bulletin board community out into the internet communities of people sharing information of how systems worked. As a 14-year-old kid, you can't really get your hands on a lot of interesting software. So you kind of have to work with people who already have that software or provide it to get a better understanding of how it works. I mean, even in libraries, there weren't books on any of this stuff because it was very kind of undercover. So being able to trade manuals, whether it was manuals on hardware, whether it was manuals on software, and then kind of incessant reading. And then as that sort of developed, as I developed professionally, I joined part of other groups. You guys may have heard of like 2600, which was a magazine that was going around for quite a while, still is today. And there were some local meetups, as well as there were other groups. Then I ended up going to DEF CON for the first time when I was 17 years old. And from there, I was hooked. I was into all of the sharing of information, learning about how different systems and different pieces of software could be repurposed, and then kind of expanding that further and further into my professional career, where I first started as a trial site coordinator for a very large law firm. So I'd go there, I'd set up all the computers, I'd set up all the, the calls back home, set up a VPN, get them, all hooked in, make sure that, they could get access to any of the data that they needed. And that quickly started to get me deeper into the security role because I was provisioning things on the network and working networking and software engineering, as well as, the standard like Windows environments. So again, started some more certifications, got Microsoft certified, got Cisco certified. And some of the work that I started doing there, because security was an interest of mine, led me towards getting a job at Sprint. At Sprint, I was one of the chief security architects globally for the company, and then moved into about 6-7 years into that, moved into being one of the heads of compliance management. So really taking that kind of deeper look into security and trying to get an understanding of, while these things might be a standard, and this may be a way that we're adhering to that standard, are there any ways for us to get around that? Or does by knowing the standard itself leave us open opportunity to attack things that the standard doesn't consider? So we constantly were testing against that. In kind of moving from there, worked for part of the Big Four, worked for KPMG for a little while. There I was doing active testing against people who had already become compliant or trying to become compliant, to let them know kind of here's the ways around some of those systems. Here's the systems that you understand that protect you, your firewall, and here's how I can throw a rock over the wall, and trying to give people a sort of a multi-layered understanding of really how security works and what it looks like in the field versus a bunch of blinky lights in the rack. Coming out of that, worked for a large distributor called Arrow Electronics. There, I created a security services team that was part of the VAR market. So all of the value-added resellers that people had out there who wanted to resell services like pen testing, services like compliance with things like PCI or with ISO 27000, at the time 7799 or 17000. As well as other standards, application security, code review, all of those different things that were kind of the test our systems to see how durable and how resilient that they are. That was really what we were doing there. And then 10 years ago, had started this company, LARES, to really bring that out to the market to give people a better understanding of the reality of security and a better connection to how do we create security in the environment, not just try and buy it. How do we actually work towards feeling secure from all of the different things that we do?
Great, great. Good introduction. Let me ask the participants of this webinar to write into the chat, what do you think is the most important IT security measure that your institution or your association takes? So what's the most important measure that you take? And I'll convey those on to Chris. So, so I heard, or the chatter out there, Chris, is that you can hack into anyone's phone. Is that true? And how do you do it?
Well, I remember the FBI putting up $1 million bounty for getting into an iPhone, and then magically they took it away because they figured out a way to get in. So you can see it in the news. You can also see that just like any other computer, a phone is really not different. They are just little computers that sit in our hands. So if you've gotten malware from surfing websites because clicking on things is fun, if you've ever gotten any type of virus or those things, it's really the same experience. Most of the thing that keeps us safe in the phone world is that we have this kind of application economy where those applications are doing some sanitization and filtering for you. Whereas on the raw internet with a browser, you don't have that same kind of control. But at the same time, the same risks exist, the same browser-based attack vectors exist coming from the stores. I'm sure you've all seen in any of the headlines that both in the Apple Store, the Google Store, and beyond, they're constantly finding these pieces of malware that are whether they're using some type of crypto mining or whether they're stealing data. All those things are viable attacks. In order to get access to a cell phone, or even just to get in the middle of the cell phone, the little piece of hardware that you guys see in the bottom right hand of the screen looks like an open USRP. What you can do there is you can, for about $3,000, you can set up your very own cell phone tower. And by setting up your cell phone tower, you'll become the strongest provider. The phone, as soon as it comes anywhere near it, once it's the higher signal strength antenna, it will attach to your USRP, and then that will forward it back to the cell tower, and you'll be able to watch every single bit of traffic that's going from that phone back out to the outside world. Which will allow you to spoof text messages. It'll allow you to read things that are unencrypted. So just with a relatively basic device, which is exactly how there's some police intercept technologies called a Stingray. It's effectively what this is a custom-built kind of cell phone tower that you could walk around with, and you could just watch everything that comes in and out of the phone.
So now that we all are nervous and we don't feel very secure, I do want to say that we've gotten some comments coming in. Lauren is concerned about password management, and Kelly is concerned about all the personal information that they have. So before we get into the password thing, which I know is coming up, as you speak around the world, what is the #1 piece of advice on cybersecurity that you can give an institution or association?
I mean, you nailed it on the head with passwords. There's a lot of complicated things that you can do in security, a lot of really expensive things that you can do in security in order to protect yourself against fringe attacks or protect yourself against the types of attacks that may take a little bit more information or a little bit more skill. Passwords themselves, I was laughing this morning as I watched something on LinkedIn of somebody just walking around the street with a microphone asking people what their password was. And some people would give it up straight away. Some people would just give them what the composition of it is. So they'd be like, oh, the password is my dog and some numbers. And then they would be like, oh, that's awesome. What kind of dog do you have? And then the person would say it, and they'd be like, oh, what's her name? And then the person would say it, and then they would dig into, oh, so the numbers, is it like your birthday or like a date or something like that? And I'm like, yeah, it's my birthday. And they're like, cool, what high school did you go to? When did you graduate? And, they're slowly breaking down these things. So the person's just kind of giving their password away. So, I think the British government did a really awesome thing when they put out some guidance around passwords. They made all these posters of toothbrushes, and it was this weird toothbrush campaign about you wouldn't share your toothbrush with somebody and you wouldn't take somebody else's toothbrush. So don't share your password because it's like a toothbrush. And I thought it was hilarious the way that they put that together. But really the way that passwords are made oftentimes are very, very, very guessable. I would say that on the engagements where there are single factor authentication, so where it's just username and password, not username and password and PIN or cell phone text message or push or something like that, but just plain old username and password. When we see those, over 90% of those organizations will get compromised within the first 10 minutes of attempts of passwords. And if you think about that, I mean, and I'm saying that from the Fortune 1 all the way down. If there is a single factor portal and you have a large number or even small number of employees, guessing their passwords is normally trivial. If any of you today have passwords that are something like, fall 2018 or winter 2018 or summer 2018 or welcome one or password one exclamation point, all of those things are passwords that are super, super easily guessable. It doesn't really take us a whole lot of time. We literally just load up a list. We go on, LinkedIn, we go on data.com, Facebook, and those things. We look for anybody who says, hey, I work at this organization. We look at the internet, we say, all right, their username format is first initial, last name, or first name dot last name, or F dot last, or something like that. And we take all of our research that we've done, everybody that is a name that would fit into that context, we formulate them into usernames, and then we just take a script and we automate it against authentication. So it's called brute forcing. With basic brute forcing, you'll normally get in.
So now that you've made me feel even more insecure, can you talk about a method for long secure passwords?
Absolutely. So not to give, I mean, I can give you my method and you can try and figure it out and maybe it'll, cause some risk or not. But what I normally do is for every single site, I will put down what that site means to me as my password phrase. So the way I would do that, let's say I'm logging into Facebook, right? I would say something like, Facebook is my favorite social network, or I hate Facebook. And then in order to make something, if it was, I love everything, maybe it's I love eBay, I love Facebook, I love LinkedIn, right? You can have that be the same for every single site. The thing that you need to do is create a series of characters that that isn't, your birthday, it isn't something interpretable about you. So, maybe it's, 1WD6. And I type 1WD6, I love Facebook, 1WD6 at the end. And now I have a really good password, right? I have all sorts of complexity. I have random characters. I have things that even if somebody read every stitch of information about my entire life, it's not in that password, right? It's just, I like it, I don't like it. Maybe it's some other feeling that you have about that site, but something that you could repeat across many, many different sites. And really all you have to do is remember what the composition is and what your little finger yoga pattern is for the front and back. It creates extremely long, but extremely easy to remember passwords, because the thing that tends to get people is that when they try and use something that's overly complex, you forget it, then you end up with a ton of password resets. If you forget it too much, you end up writing it down on a piece of paper, and we all know how secure paper is, unless you can write in some cryptographic format. But then the other method to that is if you use, to your point when you're asking in questions, if you use some type of password manager, they're excellent at being able to create random long length passwords that you can use a single password to get in, and then use that to kind of dig through all of these other different types of methodologies of creating longer passwords. And you don't really have to remember them as long as you can remember your password to get into your password manager, and your password manager password isn't terrible. Because if that's really bad, then someone will get into it and then just get all of your great complex passwords.
Okay, so as you speak around the world, what's the single most often asked question?
Oh, I mean, it really varies all over the place. I say the people who first meet those of us in my position who do security testing is, can you fix my credit? Of which I normally laugh and I go, nah, not unless the credit agency hires me to do it.
Okay.
But
moving on from that. So you talk a lot about a feeling, feeling secure, which of course I'm not feeling very secure right now. But tell me about what you tell your clients when it comes to feeling secure.
Sure. I mean, the general origin of the word security really comes from a feeling. It's not necessarily something that is a measurable, tangible thing. It's about how you feel once a certain control or once a certain measure has been implemented. So what we try and do is, through the acts of testing, through assessment, through conversation and collaboration, work together to get an understanding of where are people in their current state of how they feel about their program, and then what does that really translate into? Does that translate into being able to show some type of metrics on vulnerabilities? Does it mean that we've done a bunch of pen testing or application assessment or code review or those types of things, and we've come up with a limited number of findings that don't really cause impact to attack? So those types of things are really where we start, is to get a baseline and then figure out how do we actively grow that baseline. And by growing the baseline, you'll become more and more confident. Just like anything else, if you're training, if you're lifting weights, if you're sparring, it takes time. And as you set a baseline and you can see that your performance over time is growing, that's something that every day makes people more and more and more confident in their posture and what they're doing and how they're doing it.
Okay, so let's get really geeky here and talk a little bit about what associations and other companies should be asking their vendors. Let's start with software vendors. So what kind of a software attack vector should we be aware of?
Well, software has a bunch of different vulnerabilities. It's an ecosystem kind of unto itself. So being able to understand how data gets protected and how that protection really comes into a formalization. Back to that whole conversation about feeling. If somebody says our application is secure, my first question to them is, how do you prove that? So can you show that you've been doing white box, black box testing? Can you show that you've done static and dynamic analysis of the code? Can you show that those types of code review didn't result in any, high or medium or critical findings? Can you show that it's built into your SDLC so that your development life cycle actually incorporates security all throughout it? It's not just an afterthought that gets bolted on at the end, that it's something that, you have coding standards around, that you've been able to show that you've effectively protected the application. A lot of times I think it's funny when people kind of use the I guess explanation that we've never been hacked. And my question is, how do you know if you've never been hacked? Because if they were good and you didn't detect it, you would never know. And to that point, they kind of just stare at me very confused. So I try and look for those types of things, right? Of how the application's tested, how the application is curated from a software perspective. Are they using current pieces of software or old pieces of software in order to use it? Are they appropriately encrypting the data both in flight and at rest? And really, how do those things get created and how do they get curated long term? Not just a point in time, not just today, not just one test. How does it happen every day?
Cool. So let's move on to those data centers. You know, the big Amazon Web Services and the little hole in the wall data centers. What do we ask them?
So there's a lot of things data centers can provide. Obviously, being able to understand exactly how those machines get administered, how information flows in that environment, who has access, when do they have access, you know, is there access in between the customers, or is it only privatized to me being the customer? And then also they should be able to provide various different levels of reporting. Compliance reporting very often will look for, you know, a SOC 2 type assessment, which is really an attestation of controls. By all common regards, SOC 2s are really provided by accounting companies who are public accountants, so that they can certify the message. But it does have, you know, security controls engaged inside of it in order to give you a very, you know, common baseline of security. There's other government standards, there's FISMA standards, there's standards if you're doing commerce, like PCI, so that they can certify that it's following all of the different pieces of PCI standardization. And really at the end, being if they're able to provide multiple different layers of information, both in how the applications are going or in how the hosting environment is curated and survives, and how the versioning works, they're probably going to be a pretty good host provider. You know, I find that most of the time when people provide the information right away, and they're not scrambling for it, it's a good indication that not only they've done that before, but they're confident in their results. The times where it's something where it's like, oh yeah, we'll get back to you, and you know, a week later they're like, oh, I forgot, I'll get this to you tomorrow, and then it happens to be another week later. You know that they're kind of putting it off, and they're trying to find some way to get to a point to get to that level of compliance to earn the business. Whereas these should be kind of mainstays for people providing that service.
Okay, so before I get to asking you specific questions about the hacker craft and the good hat processes that you use, I'd like to just ask the attendees a little bit here. If you had a skilled hacker on your team, what would you want to know about your system? Now think about whether it's your association management system, whether it's your social media platform, whether it's your education platform. Think about what it is, what vulnerabilities would you want to know about your system, and put it into the chat box. I'm going to give you just a few minutes here to go. Chris, you've really been great, and I'm looking forward to this next section where we get into your craft.
Absolutely.
So yeah. We do have a question here. What is DEF CON? You mentioned DEF CON.
Yeah. So DEF CON is a conference that's part of a lot of the security conferences now, but it was one of the first bigger security conferences that people got together to share information. So it happens in Las Vegas, kind of the bridge, either the last week of July, first week of August, so somewhere in between that time frame. Effectively, you know, about 25,000 hackers from all over the world get together and share information and give talks and have workshops, welcome in people that are not part of the community or learning things in the community to all kind of get together to be hands-on. And it started, you know, I think 26 years ago or so now, but was really there as a place to share information. So whether that was in order to learn how to pick a lock, you could read a lot of books, but until you get lock picks and a bunch of locks in front of you, you're not going to be as good of a practitioner. The same thing goes with electronic. The same thing goes with hardware security. So there's villages, and at these villages, there's different focuses of each village, whether it's wireless, whether it's lock picking, whether it's hardware security, car hacking, and you can go and you can kind of wander around, and those people are there and open to sharing information and teaching people so that they can learn new things and they can drive interest in both the community and the overall world.
Great. We have a number of questions coming in, Chris.
Good.
So, Sarah asks, how easy to steal personal information across platforms. And I want to add in the association space, you know, the association management system is often the system of record, and it's sending the authentication onto these other systems. So there's a lot of web services involved. So how easy is it to steal that information?
I mean, you know, look at Equifax or any of the other large brokers of information that are out there. You can either buy it from any of the credit agencies, or apparently you could just go and steal it from the credit agency themselves. So, you know, information itself is as protected as the resource that's holding it. So if the organization that's holding it or the application that's holding it is doing a good job, kind of like we had said before, of being able to secure their assets, then it's something that takes a longer amount of time. I can say kind of without a doubt that the way security is measured is a lot more like a safe than it is anything else. Safes understand that every safe in the world is going to be cracked at some point. It'll have a fire rating. One will be 1 hour, one will be 5 hours, one will be 10 hours. It'll have like a drill and compromise rating that could be, you know, an extended amount. Security is really the same thing. If you have a very diligent security team that is doing everything that they need and doing it right, you know, you look at a company like Facebook, who recently was in the news for losing some information. They've been hyper diligent there almost the entire time that Facebook's been around about security, and you know, one slip catches them. So it was really the people who probably bang on that thing every single day and have been doing it for years finally found something. So oftentimes this is it's a byproduct of time more than it is a binary secure or not secure.
So how does a group, how do they go about assessing their vulnerabilities? And I mean, like, if they wanted to hire somebody like yourself, I mean, how do they go about doing that? What should they be doing with their internal staff?
Sure, you know, there's a lot of different ways to look at it, depending on, you know, what the value of the data is that your organization has, and what kind of profile that you have. Whether you're a provider, whether you're someone who services customers directly, whether you're, you know, kind of a secondary or third party, really getting an understanding of how the data flows in and out of the environment is the first piece. The second is getting an understanding of kind of what the vulnerabilities are that are there. So, you know, you can engage with you know, people like us or others to look at kind of an overall view of, from a technology perspective, what is or isn't vulnerable, what do those vulnerabilities translate into, you know, beyond just a red, yellow, green of a vulnerability scanner like anyone could download and any of you can download. Kind of the next step is, what can you do with it? You know, can you make that cause some type of material loss? Can you get into the customer information that we need to? So that can happen on the network side, but it can also happen on the application side, so that we have a better idea and understanding of, you know, what application vulnerabilities exist out there, and how does that either, you know, protect us or at what risk level does it put us at? And then as you get into more advanced testing, doing things like penetration testing to see how far you can go, where you can go with it, looking at a more comprehensive view of something like a risk assessment or assessment against a set of standards, so that we can get kind of a top to bottom view of what's going on in security, in the physical layer, in the social layer, in policy, procedure, process, and how it gets implemented technically. You know, all of those are kind of different ways to eat the elephant. You can start with real small pieces, or you can start looking at a much broader picture.
So Chris, Kelly has a great question here. She asks, I would want to know how easy it is to disguise yourself as someone on the leadership team and make people think you are the chairman when you really aren't, and that bogus chairman would send out bogus communications to the membership.
Yep. So electronically disguising yourself as someone else is quite easy. Whether it is using the mechanisms that they use by getting into the systems and transitioning to understanding what their password is, through, you know, multiple different levels of compromise, or being able to even guess their password oftentimes, all the way back out to trying to get into other systems in the environment and then make your way over to that executive system that may be connected to it. So then you could directly log in either from their system itself or from their webmail or something of that nature. Those types of attacks happen all the time. Very, very often they happen up at the executive level because people are trying to make, some type of ACH transfer, so they can instantly start to extract money out of the organization versus having to, sell or broker data, things like that. Physically, it's a little bit harder. All of us have probably seen Face Off and stuff like that. So if you're in a very large organization, it's much easier to impersonate an executive. Because those executives are on some lists inside, the front doors of the org. So I can tell you that I have done that a number of times of walking directly into the organization, using a little bit of facial prosthetics and things of that nature to try and get myself a little bit closer towards what that executive looks like, and then walking in the front door and letting them know who that I am with a fake badge that I've printed out, and they happily let me directly into the building like they do every other exec.
Okay, well, thank you, Kelly and Melissa, for those questions. So I'd like you to, tell me a little bit about what this red team, blue team is, and if you can give us some specific stories of a red team, blue team adventure. I think it might be a pretty good movie too.
Yeah. So we've looked quite a bit at kind of that sparring methodology, right? So how do we really get an understanding of how secure we are or how ready we are to defend our environment? How prepared are we to protect our environment? And oftentimes you get to a point where everything looks great on paper, right? And everything looks good when you're in the dojo and you're doing katas and you're trying to reproduce a kick or reproduce a punch that someone else is throwing, and it looks great, and all that stuff looks good until someone punches back. And once that starts happening, oftentimes the things that you may have practiced a million times or read a whole bunch about or really looked at from a theoretical perspective, all that stuff looks good, but sometimes when it gets out of the lab and it gets put into the real world, it doesn't quite go that way. So the concept of kind of red team and blue team is that you're both really in the same game together, but we're taking distinct sides, and we're getting an understanding of, if I am supposed to be attacking and you are supposed to be defending, let's try and exercise all of these different vulnerabilities. You try and exercise on the blue team side all of your different defensive capabilities, and then we kind of look at that from third-party omniscient, and we say, all right, here's where certain things are breaking down. Here's where things are succeeding, and then here's where things are failing. So then once we're done with those different activities, we can go back to the process and we can say, all right, this is what the defenders need. If you have jets flying over a wall, but we don't have any anti-aircraft gun, we probably need some of that because jets don't really care about walls. And so, that idea is really implemented across the security segment to say that if we have external controls and we have certain levels of access that we believe that work, okay, let's test them. Let's see if they actually work. Once we're able to get some type of access, can you identify that we got access? Can you identify that we've been moving around laterally in the environment, or we've been taking pieces of information? We've even had some where people wanted to simulate a ransomware attack. So, we created our own custom crypto locker that after we were in, we started crypto locking certain machines and seeing what they would do as far as paying us a ransom and that type of stuff. But also we'll do that on the physical side of the world and the social side of the world. So even getting outside of the electronic realm, just like I had kind of made mention of, walking in as an executive, if you're able or unable to get in electronically, can you physically walk into the facility? If it's easier and softer on the inside, and people have M&M security, which is that crunchy outside and soft milk chocolate center, do you have the ability to just walk in and get around all of those great perimeter controls by plugging in inside of a conference room, or leaving a drop computer? So we'll put something that looks like a brick that comes into powering your printer, and we'll put that in there, and it'll look no different than the power brick of the printer, and now we'll use that to start connecting to the network, to start using our access from the inside. You know, can we physically get in? I mean, a firewall is really great, but if I walk into the building and I take the firewall out, well, then I could probably get right into stuff. You know, so all of those are really part of that sparring methodology for us to get together to kind of show what we're doing from both defense and offense, and then collaborate together at the end to determine how well did these things work and what looked good on paper but failed in the real world.
So Chris, as you write your script for this new movie called Red versus Blue, tell me, give me some examples of some of the more exciting scenarios that you've been in besides for the printer scenario.
Sure. You know, they made a TV show about us called Tiger Team, which I'm still embarrassed about, but it was pretty fun. That kind of followed us around as we did these types of activities. And we went through, and you know, one was a really high profile jewelry store, one was a exotic car dealership. But you know, there's others that we've done of getting into, you know, large power plants, being able to compromise things from the outside, then getting access from the outside into the badge systems, getting into the badge systems, provisioning a badge for ourselves, then using our RFID hardware that we have, creating our own badges, then walking in on site. So then once we get on site, we're already in the badge system with our pictures inside of it. So that was the second we badge in to this extremely high secure facility, we stare the guard right in the face, and our, you know, happy smiley face comes up on their screen. So they let us write on it. And then from there, being able to figure out exactly where we're going to place a drop or where we're going to further our access. We'll place different machines inside of the environment. We'll go through and for one of these particular jobs, there was a room that they did quite a bit of talking outside of their executive office. They had a sort of executive conference room, is where they made all of these decisions on purchasing new organizations. So we would go in and we'd bug their conference room. We would set up listening taps. We would set up passive recording. So then we were able to hear all of those conversations. We set up and bugged the conference room PC because those people are logging into it all the time, of different execs or admins are logging into it for them. So we're able to get all of their passwords that way and be able to watch all of these things that they're doing, and the future of that business, being able to anticipate the future of the business, all of you know, is worth quite a bit of money to both competitors and to people in the market. Then being able to kind of recursively go back and look at the business models of you know, what does a big organization like that do? How do they create and generate revenue? Whether it was the solar fields that they had, whether it was the plants that they had that were manufacturing and creating power, whether it was, you know, hydroelectric dams. So we're then showing that because of our physical access, we can get access to all of those facilities. I could turn off an entire facility. I could make a facility overproduce. We're able to get into a dam, open a dam when it's not supposed to be open, which you can only imagine how catastrophic that is, or be able to remove all of these alerts and allow these systems to go so that they think that they're running fine. They're actually falling apart in the real world. We would compromise the camera systems to make sure that we had full control of what their visibility was, so that no matter when we were walking through a facility or when we were changing something or altering it, we had a way to intercept every piece of the feedback that they got and any piece of telemetry that they had. So whether that was the door open or door closed, we would eliminate that, and we'd eliminate their view of the camera, and be able to kind of attack the systems that they use to manage the environment by taking control of them and then manipulating what that access looked like.
Wow. So we've got about 15 minutes left, so I want to just encourage our attendees to send questions in here. So if we have time at the end, Chris can answer them. What we're going to do now is cover the big question that you might have. A, what are some of the credentials that you can expect some of the people that you hire to have? B, we're going to talk about how to convince management or your board to spend some money. And then finally, we're going to talk about how much money should be spent versus the security that you get for it. So let's talk a little bit, Chris, about if you're going to hire a security consultant or you're going to send one of your IT staff to get credentialed, give us your opinion in terms of the top credentials to look for.
Sure. I think for general practitioners, the CISSP and the CISA are very solid certifications for your broad line security practitioner. Being able to work across all the different domains of security, being able to understand security from both a tactical implementation and a policy implementation. So really looking at the ability to kind of test design and test of effectiveness. Those two are excellent. The IAM and IEM are good for managing programs, of getting an understanding of how do we create kind of criticality matrices of what is important, and then how do we then take what is important and make sure that our spend and the things that we're doing to protect ourselves are actually sitting in the place of important. Kind of like if any of you have taken that corporate time management thing where you start off at the urgent and unimportant and you have to kind of move that over to manage time appropriately. There's a very good resource for that. If you're looking for certifications around testing, there's offensive security has an OSCP and OSCE. They're good certs. They give people a good basic level of understanding on how to conduct testing, as well as some of the SANS certifications for various different things, whether it's for incident response, whether it's for security architecture and management, or whether it's security testing. The SANS Institute also does a high quality job at being able to kind of get some of these things standardized and give you a base level of information.
I've also been recently made aware that some of the cloud providers like Amazon Web Services are starting to do their own certifications for people that are setting up networks in the cloud. So
Yep.
Something to look for there. A question to ask somebody if they say, yeah, we're hosted at AWS. I think the next question might be, well, what kind of certifications do your staff have?
Yep.
So next question is, how do you convince your board of directors or your management to make an investment or more of an investment in security?
There's a bunch of different ways. There's the unfortunate reality of our industry from the security testing perspective tends to be that oftentimes if the concept of security is something like oh well, we're not going to get hacked because we're too small, or they have all of these reasons that an attacker wouldn't come after them. A lot of times what ends up helping them realize it is showing them what could truly happen. So that sometimes is the reason that people will conduct things like penetration testing, because they'll actually get to a point of saying, well, oh, well, no one's really going to attack us, or oh, we don't really have anything to attack, or those types of things, and then actually conducting it and going through the test gives them that, oh, well, someone has attacked me and I now need to respond to that. So if the organization tends to be reactive around security versus proactive around security, testing is a good start to give you a kind of relative understanding of what exists and why it exists. I think from a higher standpoint, if you start looking at what the company does and how companies operate today, it is becoming a very, very standard thing that the security of a business is something that is their competitive advantage. If any of you, as a consumer, even if it had nothing to do with computers, if you said that this company who's going to sell you an orange has a better cybersecurity program and is more secure than this company who has none of that, and the oranges were the same exact price, who would you go with? Of course you would go with the person who is more secure. You would never want some robotic crop dusting thing to be spraying an inordinate amount of poison on your orange, and if some cyber attack led to that, you would have one orange that was deadly and one orange that wasn't. That works really for every industry now, no matter what it is. If they're protecting your information, they're protecting you, and they have customers. If you have a customer, you have a ability to provide that customer security. If you can provide that customer more security than your competitor, you will win the work. So I think competitive advantage is another way that really truly gets people kind of invested in the game. And then I think, lastly, it's really getting down to the reality of our obligations. The world's a big place that interacts with each other, and I think that not just as a competitive advantage, but as a service that we all are here to provide in the world, is that we don't want it to turn into chaos. We don't want to have these things happen. Everybody wants to still be able to get their paycheck at the end of the day, and it's on all of us to kind of create a secure world for that to exist in, not a world that's extremely volatile. So, I think that as we start to show people what the ROI is on that and being able to put those things to numbers, you really start looking at things like, all right, well, if somebody's going to attack us, Miss CEO or whoever else is in the room, please let me know, what do you think the dollar value is of somebody getting into your email? What do you think the dollar value is of somebody stealing this piece of intellectual property that we just created? Every single time that you have a new idea in the company that's going to be the force multiplier that brings that company to the next level, that adds the zero, that brings X percentage in growth, those core fundamental things of the business, every time those come up, you have to say, okay, well, what are our competitors doing? How does that establish us in the market? And what's our customer base inside of that market? And inside of that, you have a dollar amount, right, of where the organization's going. Now, do you want to spend money on security to make sure that you keep that dollar amount, or do you want to just hope that you get all of that money? And really, security ends up becoming a retention piece. So, if we're going to put a whole bunch of water in a bucket, we want to make sure that there's no holes in the bucket. Instead of just putting water in, and when water comes out, put more water in and hope that we can keep the bucket filled. So those are even some more methods of taking a look at how do you use something to cost justify itself. And at the end of the day, if you spend more money on coffee than you do security testing, you kind of deserve to get hacked.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the costs involved. Obviously this is not a commercial, but so you can kind of give us ranges. But I mean, if you're an association, you've got members. Let's say you've got 7,000 members. Your annual budget is 6 million or whatever. You've got number of systems, AMS, CMS, the social media platform, LMS. And so you're concerned about the vulnerability of your data. Let's say you're a medical society and you have information on all the thoracic physicians in the world. Yeah. So at what level, let's take the low end. I want you to just do some penetration testing. What's that going to cost that association?
Those things really depend on the number of resources. Just like, someone in construction would say, how much does building a house cost? Well, it can cost everything from, nothing to as much as you want. But really, when you look at a small organization that has, a smaller footprint on the outside, anywhere from, probably maybe 10 grand up, $10,000 to $20,000, something like that. Looking at, about a week or so worth of testing. If the environment's that big, some environments are quite small. I mean, we do testing all the way down to a couple $1,000s, just because the environment is so small, because there's only a few addresses to attack. There's only a few vectors. Now, when you move that to the inside of the organization, both looking at it from an external perspective and an internal perspective, that's really going to be the same type of, time-boxed approach of getting an idea of what can we find. My philosophy in this is that you can find all sorts of issues. And if a bunch of those issues result to the same root cause, there's no reason to go out and find it 15 other times. We need to say we found this root cause and we understand where that exists in the organization. Let's worry about fixing this root cause, right? And once we can get to a point of fixing the root cause, then we can go back and worry about all of these other kind of band-aids we need to put on the environment. But general activities and testing really are not that expensive for organizations that I would consider to be small. As it gets up larger, we have some testing organizations where we're looking at hundreds of thousands of addresses, both internally and externally. And you know, of course, sure, that's going to get into a month worth of time or more of spending on that. But smaller organizations are really quite easy just because they have a very small footprint. You can get very hands-on with all of the stuff that they do. And if you work together and you're doing some things internally and externally, that collaboration piece starts to exhume some of these root cause things that's going to keep them secure in perpetuity, not just secure that day.
Thank you so much, Chris. We're running out of time today, but I do want to say that we are all appreciative that you're taking the time to share this with us. And the National Association market is, you know, quite large. There's millions of associations, and particularly those that are involved that have multiple systems. You know, they do need to be more aware of this, particularly when they're collecting a lot of personal data from their membership, and some of it could be very sensitive. And I'm always amazed at how few security questions we get as a software vendor in RFPs. It's something people really just want to, you know, bury their head in the sand and not really bring up for fear that they're not going to hear the right things, or maybe they don't even know the right questions to ask. So I thank you for providing those questions, Chris, today, and thank you again. And if there are any questions, Melissa says thank you. So thank you, Melissa.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. And you know, I gave a webinar a couple weeks ago about how to pick good testing companies. So I'm happy to share that with people, because really, at the end of the day, my job in this market is to make sure that everything that I do supports us being safer and more secure overall. So however that happens, whether it's people learning how to pick good testers or getting work done, or just, you know, shooting me an email to say, hey, I don't understand this, can you help? I'm always available and open, because, you know, my job in this industry is to go to sleep at night feeling like I made the world a little bit better that day.
Great. And Sarah, who asked that Sarah is saying she's very interested in good testing companies, and what I would recommend to anybody in attendance today is send an email to Chris, and he'll happily send you information.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Thank you, and thank you all for attending today.
Yeah, thank you all for your time.